I wasn't looking at my Post-it note. I'm sorry. That was my bad.
Darn. Okay. So let's talk about homework. Hopefully you've all received your homework 5 with my cryptic comments. I wanted to admit that homework has taken on a bigger role in this class because we're doing some things in homework that we otherwise would be doing in class. And I think that doing the stuff, doing the problems is the most important way that you're going to learn. And so we're going to keep doing that. The last 2 assignments, in fact, most assignments are 15-point assignments. If you do a perfect job or an all but perfect job, you get a 15. If you're on the right track, you'll get a 10. If you do something fundamentally wrong, I mean really wrong, so that you would lose a lot of points on an exam question, I give you a 5. Okay, so the choices are 5, 10, and 15. Okay, so those don't translate into any particular grades. I know many of you want a grade. I'm not going to give it to you. Well, I will, but not for 5 more weeks or 6 weeks or something like that. But anyway, so the way the homework grades are going to work is I'm going to add up all your points. I'm going to add up everybody's points, and I will make a grade distribution based on the points that you earn. Okay. The most important determinant of your homework grade is not how well you do on any given assignment. Each assignment is only worth a little bit. The most important determinant of your homework grade is doing them, getting them all done. Okay, I know that from experience. So it is better, and you get more points by turning in an assignment that's not very well done, but at least trying, than not turning it in at all. Okay, don't try to save me from reading something that's not very good. That is my job. Do your best, turn it in, and get the points. Got that, Hannah? Good. How's your group going, Hannah?
It's good. We've turned in everything.
So far.
I don't know why that would stop.
So your partner's not a slacker?
No. Good
answer, considering that she's on this call. So
we work together on all of them. So
good. Awesome. Awesome. All right. So let's go over homework 5. Oh, I guess I didn't show you this. Here are the goals for today. Go over homework 5, assign homework 6, and show you how to derive the aggregate demand curve from ISLM. More exciting stuff. All right. Oh, I didn't share my screen, so you can't see that. That's not very clever of me. Sorry. I think the sunny weather is throwing me off a bit today. I feel like I should be spending the afternoon in the hammock out back. All right, there we are. So you can see the goals. Jack, are you with us? You seem to be engaged in something else. Looks like he's turned off there for the minute. All right. Okay, now, the problem is, how does an increase in the income elasticity of money demand affect the slope of the LM curve? Think about the process of going from one point to another point on the LM curve. I'm going to show you one in a second. Okay, here's a picture. Think about the process going from this point to this point on the LM curve. Okay, remember that the LM curve shows money market equilibrium. So every point on the LM curve corresponds to a situation where money supply equals money demand. Now, let's take a look at the left-hand side, the money market graph right here. Okay. When we increase the interest rate from Y0 to Y1, We move along the money demand curve from this point to this point. So when the interest rate goes up, the money demand goes down from M0 to M1. Does everybody see that? Does anybody not see that? Mar, you good? Okay. We know that at this point, we're not in money market equilibrium. How do we know that? Hannah, how do we know that?
It's not on the supply.
Right. Money demand is here and money supply is out there. So money demand plus the money supply. So we know that's not on the LM curve. Okay. What do we have to do? Or let me say it this way. What has to happen to GDP to increase money demand enough to bring it back in line with money supply?
It has to increase by a proportionately larger amount than the interest increase.
I'm not sure that we can say that. What's clear is that income, GDP has to rise because rising GDP will cause an increase in money demand. You can see that in the graph here as the money demand curve shifts to the right. Okay, so an increase in the interest rate reduces money demand. An increase in GDP raises money demand back to what it was before. Okay, and that shows on the LM curve, an increase in the interest rate requires an increase in GDP to get us back on the money demand curve. Sierra, does that make sense? Yep, okay. Okay, now for the hard question. This might be a hairy question if he's paying attention. Hey now, Jack, what are you drinking there?
Yeah, good old.
What time zone are you in?
It's 5 o'clock somewhere, sir.
Absolutely. I was thinking in the UK, it's certainly 5 o'clock. Okay, now you're making me jealous. Okay, you may well be a good candidate for graduate school. Many's the hours I spent studying with one of the 2 drugs of choice for economists in graduate school. Care to hazard what they are?
You say drugs of choice?
Drugs of choice for economists.
Is it caffeine and alcohol?
That is absolutely right, yes. Rarely do we consume them at the same time of the day, though. Anyway, moving right along. Taya, that was for you. Okay, moving right along. Now, here's the hard question. What determines how much GDP has to increase in order to get us back to equilibrium? Do you understand the question, or do I need to repeat it?
Wouldn't it be the elasticity of interest, the interest elasticity of money demand?
No, because the interest elasticity tells us the slope of the curve. But you're on the right track. Since income has to increase, how much income increases depends on the income elasticity. If the income elasticity is small, then the money demand curve only shifts a little bit for a given change in income. If the income elasticity is large, it shifts a lot. That is what the elasticity means, is how much does money demand change when we change income? Does that make sense to people?
I think I'm still kind of stuck on what the difference between the interest elasticity and income elasticity is, since like they both contribute to the money demand slope.
The interest elasticity is, well, you know the difference between the interest rate. You know what the interest rate is, or an interest rate is?
Yeah.
Okay. Do you know what income is?
Yes.
Are they the same thing?
No, but they're both being represented by the money demand curve.
That is true. Okay. The interest elasticity shows how much money demand changes in response to a change in the interest rate. That is literally the slope of the curve here, expressed in percent terms. When we raise the interest rate by this much, how much does money demand fall? Well, it falls by that much. If the curve were flatter, money demand would fall by more. If the curve were steeper, money demand would fall by less, right?
Oh, so is the interest elasticity shown in the slope of MD, but
Yes.
the income elasticity is the slope of LM?
No.
No? Okay.
Good answer. The income elasticity is shown, well, okay, here's the problem. The problem is, where is income on this graph?
It's not.
It's not there. It's not visible. So it's going to show up as shifts in the curve. So the income elasticity measures how much the curve shifts. If the income elasticity is small, it only shifts a little bit. If the income elasticity is large, it shifts a lot. Okay, does that make sense to you?
I think so, yeah.
Okay, now, the slope of the LM curve is going to be a combination of the interest and the income elasticities. I think it's the interest elasticity over the income elasticity or something, but they're both incorporated into the slope.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Sure. Those are good questions. All right.
Oh, you said a combination of income and interest elasticity?
Yes,
Okay.
those are the only two. One second. All right. Sorry, guys. Had a family emergency. Crisis is averted now. Okay. So, different question. How's it going living back at home again?
I'm tired of it.
Yeah, I know. I hear you.
Yeah, me too.
I like never did I ever think I would be excited to go back to school, but I
Right.
like miss my dorm.
Yeah, I know. I feel bad for the seniors because they probably won't have a chance to do that. All right, back to macro, back to increasing the income elasticity of money demand. All right. Okay, so the shiftiness of the money demand curve reflects the income elasticity of money demand. Okay. If we increase the income elasticity, the same change in income causes money demand to shift further. You can see that in the following slide, right? So the black line shows GDP shifting with the original income elasticity. The same increase in income with a higher income elasticity is going to shift us all the way out to the purple line. Okay. Remember the problem. The problem says holding the interest elasticity constant. If we increase the income elasticity, what's going to happen? So what that means is the interest rate goes up by the same amount as in what we did in class. Money demand decreases by the same amount. But now the same increase in GDP would shoot us over to here because the income elasticity is greater. Does that make sense to anybody?
So just wondering, why does it shift, like, and the point where MD and MS intersect isn't the point of the interest rate? Like, why did it like overshoot where the interest rate is in terms of where it crosses?
Because the money demand curve doesn't care what the interest rate is. The money demand curve just cares what income is and what the income elasticity is. And so what's going on here, in fact, you're really getting at this nicely. What we're saying is if we increase GDP by the same amount as we did initially, we would overshoot. We wouldn't end up at the right spot because the interest rate would be too high. Okay. So what we're really saying here is when the interest when GDP when the interest sorry, let me start over. When the income elasticity increases, because money demand is more responsive to a change in income, income doesn't have to change as much. Okay, and you can see that on this slide if you look on the left-hand side. Okay, so the purple line is the original increase in GDP, but with the higher income elasticity. This red arrow shows the higher income elasticity, but with a lower increase in GDP. Because money demand is more sensitive to changes in income, it takes less of a change in income to get the same shift in money demand than it would before. And you can see that on the right-hand side here. With the old income elasticity, when the interest rate went up to I1, GDP went to Y1. But with the new higher income elasticity, when the interest rate goes up to I1, it takes less of an increase in GDP in order to bring us back into equilibrium. So see if that makes sense to you. Because income has a bigger effect on money demand, income doesn't have to increase as much. That's what we're saying. So instead of having to increase from Y0 to Y1, we only have to increase from Y0 to Y2, which means the LM curve has rotated counterclockwise, starting from the same point, the same increase in interest rate, but a less of an increase in GDP. So the LM curve is steeper now. And that's the answer.
So I have a quick question.
Sure.
Is the slope of the money demand curve staying the same then?
Yes.
So why
absolutely.
is it, okay.
Huh?
Why is it staying the same?
Because the slope of the money demand curve is based on the interest elasticity, and we've held that constant. We only changed the income elasticity. Other questions? These are all good questions. This is hard. Unless you're drinking the appropriate beverage.
How do you, I'm still a little bit confused on how you find out where it lands on the curve, like on the second curve, the LM curve.
Okay. I don't know exactly where it lands. I just know that with a higher income elasticity, it's going to be less than out here. It could be here, could be here, could be here. Those are all less than, right? So it depends on the exact number of the income elasticity. We just know it's going to be less. Other questions? You're keeping me honest. Hey, Jack.
Yeah.
Unless Harry is now wearing a dress, it was not him who walked in the door behind you. I'm just saying.
It's Harry. He's a Sheila. He's right. I dabble in fashion trends.
Yeah, I got that impression from class. Absolutely. All right. Any questions about the assignment?
So just wondering, how would we know the decrease in GDP that would be needed for, like, how do we know how much the slope is changing of LM?
We don't. All we know is that it's getting steeper. Without having the exact numbers of the elasticities, we won't know that for sure.
Thank you.
Sure. And that's okay, because this isn't really supposed to be math. I mean, a math class. It's more conceptual. Once this class was taught by somebody else, and their exams were like 100 multiple choice exam tests. Okay. And so it was all about memorizing stuff and being able to do questions quickly. That's a different style than I use. I would rather that you learned them more deeply and took the time that you needed. All right. Any questions before we move on to the next slide? This is going to be so much fun. I can tell. Some of you are already excited. Okay. Assignment 6, applying ISLM. All right. This is kind of pulls it all together in one situation. Okay. Here's the problem. In serious recessions, the interest elasticity of autonomous expenditure is very low. What does that mean? Suppose the interest elasticity is 0. How would you show this graphically using the 4-quadrant diagram we use to derive the IS curve? In this situation, monetary policy would not be very effective at returning GDP to potential. Show graphically and explain in detail. Okay, that's the question.
That's just the liquidity trap, isn't it?
It is not the liquidity trap. Okay, so you need to think about where does the, I'm sorry?
Would it be flat? The LM curve?
No, not necessarily. For one thing, it doesn't say anything on here about the interest or income elasticity of money demand. So the LM curve is just a normal LM curve. It says the interest elasticity of autonomous expenditure is very low.
Mm.
So that's...
So interest has little impact on...
Yeah, right. So draw the graph and figure out what it all means.
Monetary policies.
Okay. Okay, does everybody understand the question more or less?
So AE is flat?
You're on the right track.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
I think Rachel's got the answer figured out already.
I think AE is just getting flatter, Sid.
Thanks, Quinn.
Okay. So then my next question is, when do you want this due? My thought was Wednesday, but we can make it Monday if you want, or we can make it Friday.
Oh, why not? Wednesday is very good, I think. Mittwoch.
I was good for Friday.
Friday sounds way better.
Yeah, Friday's definitely better. Friday sounds good.
Okay, so then here's my proposal. Let Jack and Harry turn it in on Wednesday if they want to. And the rest of you can turn it in on Friday.
We'll do Friday, I reckon.
And everyone will be happy.
Very busy Wednesday.
Yeah, very busy on Wednesday and Tuesday.
You guys are funny. All right. Okay, now the last part of the class, deriving the aggregate demand curve. I know you guys have been waiting for this with bated breath. So let's start with a question. What is an aggregate demand curve? What does it show? I think Aspen has the answer.
Total demand in an economy.
Total demand in an economy. Okay, so if you graph it, you could have total demand on one axis. What's on the other axis?
Well, the total demand is the GDP in the long run, the income, and then it's like relative to the price level.
Okay, what's the price level?
Don't we pick one?
What price level do you mean? The price of pizza?
The price of goods and services.
Okay, so it is something like the GDP deflator then, right? It's the average price of everything included in GDP. Okay, good. That's a good start. Okay, so let's demonstrate how you actually come up with an aggregate demand curve. All right, so I think it is time to jump to the whiteboard because the whiteboard is fun. I apologize. Cheap thrills. Green lawn is whiteboard. All right, can you see that? Anybody? Good, okay. All right, first we want to change. Let's do text. All right. Okay, we have said in the past, money demand is a function of the interest rate and GDP. Is anybody confused by that? Sierra, does that make sense? Okay. Now, is that nominal or real GDP? Stefan, nominal or real GDP?
I would say nominal.
It is nominal, okay, because spending is nominal, actual spending, right? So there is a price component and a real component, okay? Going back to the example from the other day, where you carry enough cash to buy your morning coffee, right? The price of coffee matters, but also how many coffees you're going to buy matters. So there's a price and a quantity element here. So what that means is that we can expand this a little bit, and we can say money demand is a function of the interest rate, but also the quantity of things you're going to buy, and also the price level. Okay, so where y equals p times q. All right, everybody good? Okay. Now, for a long time, economists have been doing this little transformation, all the way back to the quantity theory of money that I think you guys read about in chapter 4. And what they've concluded is that money demand is strictly proportional to the price level. Okay, so a 10% increase in the price level should give you exactly a 10% increase in money demand. All right, so that changes our function just a tiny bit. I Q times P. Okay, so money demand is a function of the price level, but it's a multiplicative function of the price level. Okay, strictly speaking, this is a different function, but I'm not going to change the F. So does everybody see what we've done here? Remember, this function is an actual equation. And all we're saying is that whatever that relationship is, we multiply it times the price level. So a 5% increase in the price level causes exactly a 5% increase in money demand. All right, any questions? All right, then let's go back to the slides. What we're gonna do is we're gonna pick a price level, and then we're gonna solve the model for real GDP, that's Q. And that combination of price level and real GDP is gonna be a point on our aggregate demand curve. So we're gonna do this just like we've done everything else, right? You choose a value for one of the parameters, you solve the model, you look at what you've got. All right, so let's end this, and then we will share this. And then we'll get away from that problem. Okay, so over here we have the ISLM diagram. Over here we have the money supply and money demand diagram. Down here, we're going to construct the aggregate demand curve. We start with a price level. Given the price level, that tells us where the money demand curve is. So notice that the price level is playing the role here that income was playing before. Income plays a similar role, but note neither income nor the price level is explicitly on this graph, and so a change in income or a change in the price level is going to cause the graph to shift. So given our price level, given money supply, we now have money demand. That determines the interest rate. And then the interest rate tells us what the equilibrium level of GDP is going to be. And that gives us a point on the aggregate demand curve. So we started with the price level that anchored money demand, that determined the interest rate. The interest rate, this, by the way, then anchors the position of the LM curve on the IS curve, and then together they determine the equilibrium level of GDP, right down there. Okay, so this and this curve are vertically lined up because GDP and GDP. This one is real, this one is nominal. That's the only difference. All right. Now what we're going to do, well, let me ask you, how do we find another point on the aggregate demand curve?
Pick another price level.
We pick another price level and then solve the model again. So let's do that. Okay, let's pick, sorry for, this is a really crappy out of focus graph. But what we're doing here is we're saying if the price level goes up, so our morning coffee costs more, what happens to money demand?
It gets higher.
It goes up. So the money demand curve shifts out. And the equilibrium interest rate now has to rise. Okay, so that increase in money demand on the LM curve translates into a leftward shift in the LM curve, raising the interest rate. Okay, now let's stop there and make sure everybody is caught up. Any questions? Okay. When the LM curve shifts, we're moving along the IS curve. What's actually going on there? With higher interest rates, what's happening in the product market? Peter?
Less business investment because the cost of borrowing's gone up.
Correct. It's a reduction in autonomous expenditure, primarily investment. So higher interest rate, lower autonomous expenditure, lower GDP. Okay. Now, if we go back to the money supply, money demand graph, what's happening here is because the money demand increased, but there's the same amount of money in circulation supplied by the Fed, all of a sudden money is scarcer because people are holding on to it. And so there's less money available to spend, to finance transactions with, and because there are fewer transactions, GDP goes down. And that's what's happening over here when the LM curve shifts. Higher interest rates, lower GDP. So our equilibrium says we now have a lower GDP, a higher price level, a lower GDP. This is our second point on the aggregate demand curve. And then what we can easily do is connect the dots. That's a little better. And that tells us that aggregate demand curves are downward sloping. Any questions? So there are a couple things that you should notice here. One is that the aggregate demand curve comes from ISLM. That's where it comes from. The aggregate demand curve doesn't show much more than we have with the ISLM model. What's the big difference? What does aggregate demand show us that ISLM does not?